Hello everyone, today we're going to be going over cloth physics. So I'm going to be making a pillow, a blanket, and a curtain today. You'll be able to expand what you learn with this tool to make anything else, so like anything pinned up like a tapestry or a pile of clothes. So let's get started. I just made a little basic bedroom setup. Really, to test this stuff out, you'll just need a plane and maybe a box to act as some type of surface like a bed or a table for a tablecloth. But first thing I'm going to do is make my pillow, so I'm going to bring in a cube for that. So Shift A, cube, S to scale it down to be pillow sized. If you want to make the head pillow and make it longer, you can. I'm just going to do a throw pillow scaled cube, and then we actually want it to be really thin. So I'm going to scale it down in the X direction and pull that in so that we have a nice thin cube. And the first thing we're going to do is add some more vertices. So how flowy our cloth is going to be, how realistic it reacts, is going to depend on how many vertices we have. So right now it only has these 4 vertices for this whole face to twist around, so this would just kind of react like a piece of cardboard. So I need to add some more faces, some more vertices in there. For this case, we're going to just use our loop cut tool. So go into edit mode and then hit your loop cut, because I want to add a bunch of faces to these 2 sides, but I don't actually want to equally cut up those skinny sides. So add in a cut, and then the bottom left hand corner of your screen there should be that pop-up menu for loop, cut, and slide, and you should be able to type in 30 or 40 faces. Let me actually show that. What don't we need? We don't need this for now. Maybe I'll be right here. Okay, so I added 30 cuts. The more cuts, the more flowy it'll be, but also the more demanding it'll be, both for doing the animation and then further down the line when you just have so much information in your scene. So I did 30 and 30 because mine's square. If yours isn't proportional, you'll might have to change that just to try to make these squares. And then I do want to add 1 cut down that skinny edge. I've just found it works a little bit better. And this should be your starting primitive, full of a bunch of vertices. And now I'm going to go into object mode. So when we're doing cloth simulations, you want to make sure you're in object mode, because otherwise you won't actually see anything happening. So make sure you're in object mode, and then also make sure you have your timeline pulled up. We're going to be using this today. If you don't have it, you can go towards the bottom of your screen. When your mouse makes that double-headed arrow, you can right-click, add a horizontal split, and then the top left of that new little window, you can change that to the timeline. I'm going to get rid of that. Okay. So let's go in and add a cloth modifier. So go to your modifier section, and the very top right one is going to be cloth. And then we're going to pull up our cloth settings. I like going through my modifier just to know it is what I'm going for. So top right hand corner, the little tic tac, you can see it does pull up a different tab, which is your physics properties, but I've just found it makes more sense if I go through my cloth one, just for my brain. Actually, I need to label this to be a pillow, not a cube. Okay. So we're going to change a few settings, but first I'll show you what happens when you just put a cloth on something. So we're going to hit play on our timeline. You can see my cube falls down. I can hit pause. It pauses my cube in its free fall. And then to go reset it back to where it was, I have to do that full rewind button. So default cloth, it's just gonna fall. And for the pillow, we don't actually want it to fall. I want it to act like a cloth, like it's being stuffed with something. So I need it to not react to gravity. I don't want it to fall. I just want it to be like filled with air so it gets puffy. So I'm going to first change so it doesn't react to gravity. So at the very top of your cloth properties, under physical properties, vertex mass, change that to 0. Now if you hit play, you should see nothing happen. So it's not falling, which is perfect. And again, make sure you do your full rewind to reset it and then replay. I'll talk a little bit about these other options during the blanket, but for this, I just need to scroll down to where it says pressure. So in our cloth properties, go to pressure, check mark that, and then 1 or 2 values should be good enough. This kind of depends on how thick or sturdy your fabric is. So if yours doesn't seem like it's puffing up enough, you might need a higher pressure number. If it's like puffing up too forcefully, you could do a lower number. But now if I hit play, you can see it's puffing up my pillow. So I actually probably want that a little bit higher because it's looking a little flat. 2. And now you can see it getting fluffy. You might notice mine's like very pixelated looking. This is just because it's shading those faces individually, but I can right click and hit that shade smooth option. There's also one more thing I want to change before I finalize my pillow. So I'm going to rewind again, and I want to go down to collisions. So still in all of those cloth settings, near the bottom should be collisions. And it always automatically has object collisions turned on, so that's interacting with other objects. But I want to turn on collisions for itself. And depending on the scale of your pillow, so mine is really small. My scale is pretty small. If I hit play right now, it's going to frazzle up my pillow all clumped because my distance for self collisions is too high for this object. So it can't really understand that. So that's why if you have like unexpected behavior, it might be because of your collisions, the distance being too high. Oh, and that stopped. So that might overwhelm your computer. When you're working with cloth, make sure you're saving often. Make sure if yours is struggling, you save between like any notable change. And here's my scruffle pillow. I don't want a scruffle pillow, so I just have to change my self collisions down to a smaller value like 0.001. And now let's try hitting play. Now you can see I have a nicely puffed up pillow. And you can pause it at whatever time once it starts like stabilizing. And you can also go back once you pause it and scrub in your timeline. So if you liked the more less filled version of the pillow, you can pause it at that. Otherwise, you can choose where you actually prefer your fabric shape. And once I'm happy with my fabric effect, I can finalize it by applying my modifier. So right now, if I saved Blender, closed out, I would come back with my timeline, most likely at 0, at 1, and any sort of cloth object I have, I would have to hit play to get to where I want them to appear in the scene. So I want it to always appear like a pillow. So it's as simple as applying my modifier to make that permanent. So if I go back to my modifiers, hit apply, and then go back on my timeline, you can see that I still have this pillow shape. And now, actually, let me show you. So before I applied it in edit mode, this is what my pillow will always look like, even if I have my timeline playing. But once I have applied the modifier, if I go into edit mode, you can see it gives us that puffed up view of the pillow. So we could go in, if you want to have like a dent mark to where your head goes, you can use soft selection and push that in. If you need to add any detailing, you can like scale areas up to get a little like fringe on your pillow. You can also add modifiers to this. So mine's a little bit jagged in spaces, so I probably want to go in and add a subdivision surface modifier just to smooth it out. But that'll give you a nice pillow. So I'm going to put this on my bed to set up a space for my blanket. Okay, so here's my little pillow setup. I just went in and duplicated that same pillow. If you want it to be more realistic, I would recommend redoing your square and refilling it because it might react slightly differently each time. So if you want more realistic variety between your pillows, especially because I did this long shape, I just duplicated it and stretched it out. I would recommend starting with that shape and then make the pillow. But now I'm going to put my blanket in. So first thing I actually want to do is move this to the center of the room so that my wall isn't an issue. So I just want my fabric to fall into my bed, and the way I had my bed positioned, if I put my plane over this, it's going to hit the wall and like act as if it hit that. And usually when I've been trying it, it's been like flinging the blanket in weird ways. So I'm just going to avoid that. Put anything I want it to lay on in the center, and I can move everything back after. But first thing, I'm going to be making this out of a plane. So just a plane, just the one face. I can add my cloth modifier after I name it Blanky. So add my cloth modifier, and it disappeared, and that's because my timeline wasn't at 0. So make sure you go back to 0. And now if I hit play, it just falls. So the most important thing for this is I need it to collide with stuff. So anything that I want it to hit and be stopped by, I need to add a collision modifier. So I'm going to click on like my bed, go to my modifiers for it, and add collision. Same with all of my pillows. Add the collision modifier. So this is telling Blender that they cannot let the blanket pass them. And then I also want to do it for my plane. So really everything I added a collision modifier except for my blanket. Now if I hit play, you can see it doing great things. So now you can see it's freaking out because it's hitting everything. But the reason it's not reacting like a blanket is because I didn't add enough vertices yet. So let's position this over my bed. It also helps if you have it relatively like close to what you're going to be dropping it on, just because you don't have to wait for that full animation of it falling, especially if your computer is struggling with running these simulations. Sometimes it just takes forever for it to drop. So I positioned it right over my bed. I'm going to go into edit mode and add some more vertices. You could do it like we did the pillow, where I did loop cuts, but in this instance I'm going to do the whole thing equally. So if I hit right click and subdivide, it'll add some subdivisions. I'll have a pop-up in the bottom left hand side of my window where I can type in how many subdivisions I want. So make sure you have everything selected if you do it that way. So hit A to select everything in edit mode, then right click, subdivide, and then I'm going to add in 30 cuts. 30 or 40. Again, the higher number, the more dynamic and flowy it'll react to the other like objects, but it'll also be more taxing. I'll try 30. And now if I hit play, nothing happens because I'm in edit mode. I always forget that. So make sure you're in object mode. And now I can see it nicely fall on my bed and my pillows. Mine's all pixelated because it's shading the faces. If I right click and hit shade smooth, we can see it a little bit better. And this one I'll play with the settings a little bit. Let me zoom back in time. I'm going to open up my properties. So through my cloth modifier, if I hit the tic tac, that top right button, I can play around with a few settings. So I'm not going to go through these individually. I did post a resource on Discord under that class resources channel where someone has a video where he specifically goes through each and every single thing and like has comparisons between them. So if you do want to learn contrast of everything, that's a great resource. It's very dense. I'm just going to be showing you the presets because that's easy. So the top right part of my cloth section, I have presets. We have cloth, denim, leather, rubber blanket, or silk. And if you look at this stiffness area, so this is kind of just like how dynamic your cloth is going to be, how stiff it's going to be. If I choose something like cotton, you can see the values of that. You can see how your cloth reacts. If I go back in time, choose something like leather, you might notice all of those numbers went up. So basically the higher numbers, the more stiff it's going to be. The lower the numbers, the more flowy it's going to be. So this is a leather blanket. Very pleasant. Then we have something like silk where it's going to have really low numbers. So silk is at 5, our cotton was at like 15. But you can play around with these, see which one's most similar to the type of fabric you're going for, and you can even go in and like alter these individually. I think I'm gonna go with, wait, let me look at denim, but I think I'll go just with a cotton. So I'm gonna do silk for my curtains. So here's my cotton blanket. One thing you might want to change is again with collisions. So all I've done to change this is changed my preset. If I want to go in and change the properties specifically, I'd be working with stiffness and damping. But I'm going to scroll down to collisions. I'm going to put on self collisions. So if yours is all falling into itself, like this right here, you're going to want to put on self collisions. Again, because mine is a very small scale in my scene, I have to reduce this distance. Otherwise that weird carnation effect will happen. You might also notice my blanket is like slightly floating over all of my object, and that's because my object collisions is set to 0.015 meters, and this is apparently 0.015 meters. So if I make that smaller, it'll come a little bit closer. I've also had a few students report that their cloth just like floats in the air when they hit play, but like kind of forms over it, so it's reacting like a cloth, but it's not ever touching down. And they've had like they've all fixed it by just totally redoing it. So I'm not sure why that issue is happening, but if you do get that like cloth is like falling over a bubble, like hovering like a ghost, just delete it all and redo the cloth, and it's been working for them. So I changed my collisions and re-dropped it. You might also want to play with how you're dropping it. So I've just been like having my blankie like in tension above the bed and I've dropped it. But if you want it to lay like you threw it on, you can play around with your rotation of the plane before dropping it. Sometimes this does a little bit unexpected things. Sometimes it'll like go through all of your objects, but this will give you more wrinkles, some more dynamic laying. I think I'm just gonna do it like this. But once again, once you're happy with where it's laying, we just have to go in and apply the modifier. So I'll be happy with this. Go back to my modifiers, hit apply. Now I can go into edit mode, edit anything I might need to do. I can move it around. I can go back to zero up my timeline and it'll stay as that form. For a blanket, most people want it to have some thickness, so right now it just looks like a bed sheet. But if I want it to be a little bit puffier, I can, well, first off, I'm going to add a subdivision surface modifier because there's all those like chonky bits. So get that in to smooth it out. So I probably wouldn't have actually paused it here because there's this like clipping issue happening. Pretend I chose a different frame. I could technically go into my edit mode and move stuff around. So I added a subdivision surface modifier. To give it a little bit of thickness, I'm just going to add that solidify modifier. So a positive value for this is going to have it go towards my bed. You can see the thickness value. It's going towards the bed and the pillows. If I want it to like fluff upward, I can do a negative value. And depending on how many wrinkles and how thick you want it, will determine how successful this looks. So you can see mine like clipping into itself. But this will be the simplest way to do it. I bet if I have it at like negative 0.01, it'll look kind of nice. Yeah. So there's my blankie. I applied the cloth. I put on a subdivision surface modifier. I put on a solidify modifier just to give it a little bit of thickness. Oh no, I have another pillow. Ugh. I mean, he's covered. We don't need him. I'll put him over here, I guess, because I have this nice flowy part. And this guy could be on top of my bed now. He's been promoted. So last thing I want to put in, oh my god, everything's floating, is a curtain. This one's going to be the most complicated because we're going to be doing steps beyond the cloth settings. This has just been playing with a few of, like barely any of the cloth settings even. So for any sort of fabric that you want like attached to something when it does its fabric effect, so like a tapestry, or if you have like a jacket hanging up or anything, you're going to want to pin it in place. The curtain is going to have an additional step where we're going to animate it. So the pinning method will carry over to any like stationary object, but we're also going to do something called hooks that you would use for animating. So for our curtain, we're going to just use a plane again. So Shift A, Mesh Plane. I want mine upright, so I'm going to hit R to rotate it around the Y axis, so hit Y, and then I'm going to type in 90, hit enter, and then I can scale this to how I would like it. And first thing I'm going to do is add some subdivisions. So go into edit mode. So normally when I do this, I'm going to want to add all of my subdivisions. But for this scenario, because I have to put hooks in, which I'll show in a second what those are, I'm going to break down my subdivisions into 2 steps. So it's still subdividing, putting the cloth on, hitting play, but because I have to put hooks on, I'm going to subdivide it. So right click subdivide, and I'll only do it like 5 subdivisions, just because it'll be easier for me to work with the lower amount of vertices. If you do want to skip this step, you could put the 30 or 40 subdivisions in. It's just going to be a little bit trickier to put our hooks in because you're going to have to count out like every 5 vertices and then do something, count out every 5. So I've put in a plane, I've only put in like 5 or 6 subdivisions. Imagine these vertices at the top now are like the hooks of a drape, the rings that they're like using to slide on. So whatever your spacing you want for those. Once I have that, I'm going to add some hooks. So click on one of your vertices and new hotkey. We have 2 new hotkeys today. This is the first one. It's Control H. So H for hook. Control H, and then you'll have hooks come up. You want to do hooked new object, and you'll have that little orangey red plus sign pop up. And you might also notice a little thing was added to your outliner. So I'm going to go through, click each of these top vertices, do Control H, hook to new object, Control H, hook to new object. If I had done my 40 subdivisions, I would just have to count off like every 5 or 10 vertices and then just click that one and do the Control H, hook to new object. So this added a bunch of these plus signs in my viewport. You can see they're individual objects that are actually applied as modifiers. So before I use them, I'm going to go back to my cloth and complete my subdivisions. So make sure your plane is in edit mode. I want to select all of the vertices, so I'm going to hit A. And then if I hit right click subdivide, I can now add in the amount of vertices I actually want. So I'm probably going to do 4 or 5. So this is 4 or 5 cutting up the 4 or 5 I already did, so it's a lot higher than if I were to originally type in 4 or 5. But you can see now, like if I did this, I would have to be like, hook, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, hook, 1, 2, 3, hook. And once I have this, I'm going to animate these hooks. So this hook step is only for things that you want to, because I want this drape to be like swooshed up into itself. If you're just doing a static hanging object fabric, you don't need to do these hook steps. I'll like signal when those steps would start for that. But to make this curtain, now I have to animate these hooks from their like closed position where they're spread out to an opened up curtain position where I squish them all together. So I'm not going to really be covering animation in this class, but what we're going to do now is add some keyframes. We're going to mark moments in time of notable locations for these hooks, and Blender will automatically have like a smooth transition. So first I want to be at like full rewind at that one point in our timeline. I want to go into object mode, and I'm just going to drag select all of my hooks. And I want to note that this moment in time, they're indeed like spread out, my curtain is closed, and to tell my timeline that, I'm going to hit I. So new hotkey I for insert keyframe, I for it's a line and you're marking something down in your timeline. So it should bring up this menu, and then hit location. Again, make sure you're in object mode because that hotkey does something different depending on if you're in object or edit mode. So make sure you're in object mode, you have your hook selected, then hit I, and then tap location, so that top area. And you're going to notice a little yellow dot showed up at your timeline. So that's marking your keyframe. Now we're going to go forward in time and mark a new location for these hooks. So I recommend going like somewhere between 30 and 50 out in your timeline. How far out is going to be how gradual or quick that transition is going to be. If you only go like 2 or 3 steps out, it's going to be like go from closed curtain to open like within 2 steps, and it'll just like fling it open forcefully. So if you do want a more dynamic swish to your fabric, you can do a shorter time, but if you want it to be more just like laying open, like there isn't any implied motion, you're going to go like 30 or 40 out. So I'm going to go 40 on my timeline, and now I'm going to move my hooks to be where they would be if I had opened up my drape. So imagine these hooks are the actual hooks of your curtain. So I want to grab all of them except for one, hit G to grab it. I'm going to constrain that to Y and just slide them in. And then grab everything except 2, hit Y to constrain it. Unfortunately, GG slide isn't going to work for this because they're not like attached to anything. So you have to hit G and then Y to constrain it to that Y axis, or whichever axis yours might be on. But I'm just going to hit them until they're all like squished up together. And once I have them in this position, I'm going to drag select all of them and then again hit I, insert keyframe, location, and now if I scrub my timeline back and forth, you can see they're gradually like opening and closing your drape. Nothing's happening to my plane, but that's okay. I haven't like told it to do anything yet. So go back to 0, and now is the time. This is when it starts for tutorial, also for if you're doing tapestry. So the pinning is what is notable here to have it tacked in place, because if I hit play now, nothing will happen because I haven't applied a cloth modifier, but you can see my hooks moving. But if I go in, grab my plane, if you go to the modifier section, again, you're going to see all these hook modifiers. So I'm just going to like dock them closed for now. But I'm going to add my cloth modifier. Again, if I hit play, like it's just falling to the ground. So I need to do this next step to actually tack it in place so it doesn't fall down. And to do that, I want to go to edit mode, so tab. I want to grab whatever vertices that I want to be tacked up. So I should say pin because it's going to be actual relevant word. So pinned. In this case, I want them to be pinned at the hook. So I'm going to grab each of those vertices that intersect with a hook. So I want to pin mine to hooks. If you just want yours vaguely pinned, you could just like grab the two corners. Once I have those selected, I have to designate these vertices as like a special squad. So I'm going to go to my object data properties, so that green icon in the right side. And at the top of that, you're going to notice something called vertex groups, which is perfect because we have a group of vertices. So hit a plus sign to open up a new group. We're going to name our group pins, because these are where we're pinning the fabric. This hasn't actually like accepted these vertices into this group. We just made a group, an empty group called pins. We have to tell Blender to put our little special pin group, our like group of vertices into this. So I'm gesturing with my hands again. I wish my screen could just like read what I was saying and would do it for me. So we have this group of pins that aren't a part of this yet. This is empty. So once we have this created, you can see a little assign button popped up under it. So hit assign, and that's gonna put them into the group. So if you like do these steps, you select them, you make a pin group, and then you like do the next step and they still aren't sticking, it's probably because you forgot to hit assign. So make sure you hit assign. But now, I mean, if we hit play again, still nothing's going to happen. Now we have to tell the cloth modifier to use this group of pins as pins. So I'm going to go into object mode right away, just because I'm going to be hitting my play soon. And otherwise I'm going to forget, and then nothing will happen, and I'll be confused. But I'm going to go to my cloth modifier, go to my tic tac button to bring up its properties. And again, if you want to set a fabric to this, I'm going to have a silky drapes. Oh, and I never labeled this. Curtain. I don't know if there's a difference between curtain and drapes. So I changed my preset to silk just for fun. But the important thing for this is to go down to where it says shape. So right above collisions, there's a section called shape. And you have something called a pin group. So the pin group is where you have to put your pins into. So click that. You can see your vertex group showed up, your pin group. So now if we click on that, it's going to use those pins as something to keep it in the air. And in this case, because we pinned it to some hooks, they're going to be pinned to those hooks and react with those hooks dynamically. If you left out the hook step, yours will just like hang in the air nicely. But now, since I hit play and I put my animating hooks attached to it, you can see it scrunches up my fabric. And one thing I do want to do before I'll be happy with it is put on my self collisions, because you can notice when I hit play and let it slide in, it starts like overlapping itself. So I'm going to put on self collisions. Again, make sure yours is small enough so it's not like mine where it becomes a weird crumpled mess. And now if I hit play, and then let it settle to where I like it, again you can hit pause, and then if you want a more dynamic one, you can do it while it's in motion. If you have a shorter transition between those hook locations, it'll be a more violent movement. But once you find a spot you're happy with, and to like save, quit out, and come back with it stuck in this position rather than again like this, you're going to go into your modifiers and apply your cloth. So for this, because we have all of these hook modifiers as well, we're going to have to apply those too. So let's open up our hooks and apply them. and apply our cloth. And now if I go back in time, you can see my hooks are changing, but my cloth stays the same. And I can actually go in and delete my hooks now. And I can do any edits I might need to my mesh for my curtain. I can add a subdivision surface modifier. I can add that solidify to give it a thickness. But that'll give you a nice crumpled up curtain. So again, you can use cloth to do a variety of things. I made one to be puffy, like a pillow. You can just have something fall into something, like a blanket, like a thrown piece of cloth, like a tablecloth. Or you can also drape it up with your pins. And if you need to have it squish in like a curtain, that's where you're using and animating those hooks. So that's all for this class. I'll see you guys next week.